Welcome to Order Militaris Radio TV. We here are lifelong Catholics, and what we do here is all for free in love of Jesus Christ, in the most holy Trinity, in His holy Church, and will defend their Holy Mother, the Church. Our work is the true sense of apostolate. Any funds raised goes back into this work for equipment. This helps us give you an unbiased, hard-hitting truth that is not controlled by political correctness or interest groups. And today we're going to be covering the first chapter of The National Suicide, Military Aid to the Soviet Union by Anthony C. Sutton. And it's the Detente aggression. And we welcome Brother Alexis to the show.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on Order Militaris Radio TV. It's always a pleasure to be on this new apostolate breaking grounds in independent, truly independent Catholic media and English-speaking world. We talk about things here that you won't hear on any other channel, and we're going to talk about them in ways that you won't hear because we're outside of the box. Okay, we're touching that third rail, and no one pays us to say what we say. We do it for the love of Jesus Christ, and this is a wonderful apostolate. And now we're going to talk about something that definitely wasn't in your high school history textbook. Did you know that the United States armed the Soviet Union during the Cold War? You didn't know that, did you? You thought the Russians were doing it all by themselves. That would have been true if they were true opposition. But as we pointed out already before, that the Soviet Union was bankrolled by Masonic banks in New York City, just as Adolf Hitler was bankrolled. And just like the Bushes were bankrolled, and just like the Trumps were bankrolled. So this is another chapter in showing you just how deep the collaboration goes. And this might help you understand where $2.3 trillion spent by the Pentagon went, and they can't find where it went. It went to the Soviet military. Is that even believable? Yes. Well, let's talk about it now. Sutton, Anthony Sutton, excellent English investigator, laid it all out. And in the course of his life, he ended up a Catholic. He was such a man of the truth that he not only said the truth that was going on about in the world, but once he found that how evil the Masonic lodges were around the world and how the only institution that ever opposed them was the Catholic Church, he became a Catholic. And so hopefully he's watching down from heaven. Now we'll talk about his programs here. We're an organization dedicated to defending Catholics from persecution. And the best defense you can have, the first line, is knowing who the enemy is and knowing how evil they are. So Russia, our enemy in the Cold War. Go ahead, AJ.
This dedication is powerful. Dedicated to the memory of the 35 million individuals killed by Soviet statesism between 1917 and 1972. This business of lending blood money is one of the most thoroughly sordid, cold-blooded, and criminal that was ever carried on to any considerable extent amongst human beings. It is like lending money to slave traders or to common robbers and pirates to be repaid out of their plunder. And the men who loan money to governments, so called for the purpose of enabling the latter to rob, enslave, and murder the people, are among the greatest villains that the world has ever seen. Lysander Spooner, from his writing No Treason, Boston, 1870.
His denunciation went unheard because when we talk about what happened a century later, and this is one thing in American law. There's two things in American law that are never punished: crimes by the members of the judiciary, judges, and crimes by bankers. You almost never hear any crime, but if they violate some tiny little pharisaical rule of the Security Exchange Commission or the banking laws, then there's a penalty. But if they fund regimes that killed millions of people, they never personally get tried. So now we're going to hear about how bad it was.
Yep.
Where does the story begin, AJ?
Chapter 1, the Detente aggression cycle.
Detente. Okay,
Detente.
detente.
Yeah, I love those French.
So let me explain to the audience. Detente is a French word meaning understanding. And when we speak about detente, we talk about, it's usually in reference to relations of Russia with the West, in which there were agreements, understandings, or peace. So there's the title of the chapter means cycles of peace and understanding to cycles of war.
Now, this quote comes from the memorandum in the State Department files of September 1944. Russia remains today more than ever an enigma for the Western world. Simple American minds imagine that this is because we don't know the truth about it. They are wrong. It is our lack of knowledge which causes us to be puzzled by Russia. It is that we are incapable of understanding the truth about Russia when we see it. George Kennan, memorandum in the State Department files dated September 1944. As the reader opens this book, he may well have one thought in mind. Military aid to the Soviets? Impossible. How can that be? The impatient or unduly skeptical reader will find an instant overview of the evidence in the Appendix C, which is in the back of the book, which lists from the authentic Soviet source the technical specifications of the 96 ships used by the Soviet Union to transport weapons and supplies to Haiphong for use in South Vietnam against the United States and its allies. A glance at this appendix will verify with hard precision that while the ships on the Haiphong run may fly the Soviet flag, most of them are certainly not Soviet in construction. Moreover, all their propulsion systems originated outside the Soviet Union. Yeah, and in the preface it says,
it's unbelievable. Their navy was being built.
Yep, in the preface it says 100,000 Americans died by the hands of the Soviet Union, but by the technology and other items made by the United States.
By the United States. Okay, so how did this come about? I mean, how did it even begin? I guess it began right after the revolution.
From time to time in the last 50 years, both Democratic and Republican administrations have declared a new policy of peaceful trade with the Soviet Union as the road to a world at peace. We should probably mention about the two candidates today and what they represent.
Yeah, we've been talking about Sutton's books and what he thinks, and we showed Sutton. Sutton has conclusively shown that Hitler was recruited, financed, supported, prepared, and armed by New York bankers, and that his politics doesn't reflect something that's particularly German. It reflects the Masonic lodges in New York, which are controlled actually by German lodges as a union of the two. And the fascism, the eugenics, the racist nationalism, all comes out of New York bankers' families. That's their view of the world. And that's what's behind the scamdemic. On the other hand, they've also financed the entire Russian Revolution from the beginning. Stalin in particular, they assisted in the starvation of 20 million Ukrainian Christians to death. They even bought their food and shipped it to the US. And this reflects the fact that the Masonic lodges that control the banks of New York want profit so much that they're willing to make deals with absolute totalitarians. And you would think, well, Marxism and capitalism, they're radically different things. But no, they're the same thing, because if you can have a totalitarian state, then as a corporation, you can guarantee a monopoly. And when a monopoly is guaranteed, a banker is most certain of the return of on his investment. So bankers want at one time both national socialism, where the government guarantees that this company that your bank invests in will make a profit, or they want communism, where you loan money to the government and it guaranteed a profit because the whole nation's been enslaved. So they're both good investments for an absolutely diabolic banker. And so this is the game played by the New York bankers and the Masonic banks of New York in the last century. They support Hitler or they support Stalin. And they also have been completely controlling American politics. And so it shouldn't surprise you that in this year's election, we have someone who is a make a Germany great again candidate, okay, or make America great, it's the same politics, or let's have complete Marxism. We have a Stalin figure and a Hitler figure, although they don't appear to be that way, but that's the game being played. It's the same theatrical act, and if you trace back both of them, they both are financed by New York bankers, and they both come out of the New York political scene. So that's the general thing. So you set the stage where we're not talking about something strange that's never happened before and doesn't happen anymore. We're talking about the long game played by the Masonic banks in New York. So, and we talked about how they financed Trotsky and actually got the U.S. president to give Trotsky an American passport so he could get into Russia and start the Russian Revolution. So don't blame the Russian Revolution on the Russians. Okay.
Oh, here we go again. Bridge building to the Soviets began in 1918 under President Woodrow Wilson, before the Bolsheviks had physically gained control of more than a fraction of Russia. As a result of this trade, the Bolsheviks were able to consolidate their totalitarian regime. Edwin Gay, then a member of the U.S. War Trade Board, later dean of the Harvard Business School, and a longtime member of the Council of Foreign Relations, is the most likely originator of the bridge building. He is on record as follows in the State Department's files for 1918. Mr. Gay stated that the opinion that it was doubtful whether the policy of blockade and economic isolation of these portions of Russia which were under Bolshevik control was the best policy for bringing about the establishment of a stable and proper government in Russia. Mr. Gay suggested to the board that if people in Bolshevik sections of Russia were given the opportunity to enjoy improved economic conditions, they would themselves bring about the establishment of a moderate and stable social order. Minutes of the War Trade Board, 1918.
This is the exact same politics we see with President Nixon's open doors to China policy, which has taken China from a backward economic power and made it almost as great an economic power as the United States, and it will soon pass the US. But has it changed their politics one iota? Not in the least. Not in the least. It's just a big game to justify investing in a country that enslaves its people, persecutes its people, mass murders its people, and definitely does everything it can to exterminate Christianity. The Masons wanted to take down Tsarist Russia because it was a Christian monarchy. And they know that of all the forms of government, the Christian monarchy is the best and it's the pleasing to God. And the Masonic Lodge, being the most diabolic and evil organization on the face of the planet, wants to destroy what's best. And so they took it down. And they were financed by Masonic banks in New York for that. So
all this is well known in Washington, although the official version for public consumption sidesteps the historical realities, which are not incorporated into our policies vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. The real story has been told elsewhere in profuse technical detail. Now see bibliography in the back of this book, folks. More briefly, in June 1944, W. Averill Harriman, reporting to the State Department on a discussion with Stalin, made the following statement. Stalin paid tribute to the assistance rendered by the United States to Soviet industries before and during the war. He said that about 2/3 of all large industrial enterprises in the Soviet Union had been built with United States help or technical assistance. U.S. State Department decimal file 033.1161 Johnston Eric 6-3044 Telegram June 30th, 1944.
That doesn't say everything. And what did Stalin do on his reign? He killed 40 million Russians. He killed 40 million Russians when we're building factories for him.
And Averill goes on. Stalin could have added that the remaining third of the Russia's large industrial enterprises and military plants had been built with German, French, British, Swedish, Italian, Danish, Finnish, Czech, and Japanese help or technical assistance.
Mm-hmm. And one thing, this helps us explain two things. Hitler would have won the Second World War if he hadn't attacked Russia. And there's whole books written, hundreds and thousands of historians have said, why on earth did he attack Russia? He must have known he could not have won. Mm-hmm. But the goal of the Freemasonry was as maximize armed conflict, justify our investment in Russia, and destroy as much of Christian society that was left in Russia after we tried to starve 20 million Christians to death. And so it was a necessity of the Lodge that Hitler attack Russia. And this proves that Hitler knew he was an agent of the Masonic lodges and doing what he said. And the Masonic lodges had such power over the Second World War that something very unusual results at the end of the Second World War that most of us have never paid attention to. But there's an itty bitty little bit of land that was put under Allied control after the Second World War, deep behind the Iron Curtain. And that one little area was guaranteed freedom. And where was that area, AJ? Do you know your history well enough?
Let's see, Poland.
Right. Close. It's where the wall came down, allegedly. Talking about Berlin. Okay. Berlin, half of Berlin was under Allied control, and throughout the entire Cold War, it was a free city. Mm-hmm. And everyone said, well, of course, it was an agreement among the Allies that the Allies controlled Berlin, but that doesn't really make any sense why we would have to control Berlin. It's not the capital anymore. And so whoever, even if you own the whole city, it wouldn't mean anything. But it is very significant for the lodge, because let us remember now, the Masonic banks in New York are controlled by Brown Brothers Harriman, who are members of Skull and Bones. And Skull and Bones is a Masonic lodge founded by another Masonic lodge in what city?
Berlin.
Exactly right. So they had such power on both sides of the fence, both in US and Russia at the end of the war, that they carved out a little principality for themselves and guaranteed that their lodge would remain in the West after the war. And where that German lodge is, we don't know its name or precisely where it is, but it's somewhere in West Berlin. Okay, you can be certain of that.
Official Washington, also known as Soviet industrialization, has been preeminently Soviet militarization. The first priority in Soviet industrial plans was given to the military departments. Indeed, the original drive behind Russia's industrialization was military. This objective was clearly stated in 1929 by Untitled, Vice President of the Revolutionary Military Soviet, before American firms went into Russia to carry out the 5-year plans. We must try to ensure that industry can, as quickly as possible, be adapted to serving military needs. Therefore, it needs the necessary to carefully structure the 5-year plan for maximum cooperation, interrelationship between military and civilian industry. It is necessary to plan for duplication of technical ecological processes and absorb foreign assistance. Such are the fundamental objectives. Provided, April 28th, 1929.
So there's, this is public record. There's no excuse then to invest in Russia unless you're definitely going to support communist domination of the world, because Russia had that objective, that it was given that objective by the Masonic lodges. So this is part of their creating of theater, but it guarantees constant sales, constant investment, and constant profits, and it guarantees that the whole population of Russia will be enslaved and work for whoever invests in Russia.
Even after the massive US-Soviet trade agreements of 1972, which will obviously further enlarge the Soviet military-industrial complex. If this is not obvious to the reader now, it will be at the end of this book. Secretary of State Rogers could claim that these new trade agreements could create a climate for peace, unknowingly reiterating the same still unfulfilled claims that Edwin Gade made 54 years ago. Just how the climate for peace is to be achieved is not stated, for good reason. The historical evidence goes the other way. What is peaceful trade? It is an essential but ignored truth that peaceful trade can only flow from a world at peace. Trade cannot create peace. The blunt, unwelcome fact is that peaceful trade with statist countries is a non sequitur. Statist systems create wars and internal oppression. This was as true of Hitler's Germany as it is of the Soviet Russia. For peaceful trade, you must first have a world at peace. Trade is a symptom of peace, not a cause of peace.
Mm-hmm. And in many of these instances where Sutton is saying, using the word peaceful, remember he's Brit, he means peace, what we would say peacetime trade.
Yeah. The reader may counter argue, well, some goods are peaceful. What's wrong with exporting sugar or soap powder or automobile gasoline? The problem with this argument is that almost all products have some military use. An effective formula for Molotov cocktails is 1/3 sugar and 2/3 gasoline. Another formula is 1/3 soap powder and 2/3 gasoline and a dash of oil. So whether the sugar, soap powder, and automobile gasoline supplied by peaceful trade are used in kitchen, garage, or a civil war depends on intent of the recipient. Intent is the primary question, but Soviet intent is not considered by Washington policymakers in this context, as it will be discussed further in Chapter 2. More important than Soviet military use of imported civilian goods is the use of imported technology to produce military goods. Rather than sell machine guns, we are selling the machines with which to fabricate machine guns. History teaches the lesson that statist systems are inherently aggressive. Moreover, statist systems have little ability to push forward the frontiers of technology. Thus, any technology transferred to a statist system will more than likely be used for military or oppressive purposes. The record of the last 50 years provides evidence that the United States has received back its own technology on the battlefield from both National Socialists and the International Socialist Soviets. This is a simple, tragic, but ignored lesson of modern history.
And what happens in the meantime is that many tiny little nations have been destroyed by this theater, this theatrical fight between the West and the communist bloc, or between Nazis and communists. Let's take some examples. North Korea. North Korea wasn't communist, but the communists took it over, and then they began this long conflict between that and South Korea, where the New York bankers supported both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And North Korea has been completely destroyed, and the people of North Korea have been reduced to the most inhumane slavery possible, having to eat grass and rats raw, so that most North Koreans have all the parasites found in field rats in their bodies, worms and all kinds of things crawling through their flesh. Vietnam, Vietnam. Vietnam, a very devout Buddhist nation, and it's completely and utterly destroyed by the communists, and the bankers backed both sides. And the few Catholics that were in the South were just driven out, or they're just terribly persecuted. We won't even talk about Cambodia, where more than 2/3 of the people were genocided by their own Marxist government. We have the little countries of Cuba, or the countries of Venezuela, the countries of Nicaragua, all these little countries that have been targeted to keep the military industrial establishment going on both sides and keep the bankers making money off public expense to support these wars. Yep. We could end Angola, we could end all countries all around the world. Libya right now, forces. You have Turkey on one side and France on the other. Well, they're both NATO countries, but they're fighting on opposite sides of the conflict in Turkey. So in Libya, so, and now we see it with Armenia, okay? Because we have Russia supporting Armenia, and we have the United States supporting Turkey and Azerbaijan.
Yeah. So now we get into the next section of this chapter. Technological transfer is the critical issue. Before we present the evidence and press our argument, we must clear the decks. What precisely is the relationship between military assistance to the Soviet Union and peaceful trade? Our military assistance to the Soviet Union has taken two forms. First, direct assistance to the transfer of military information, weapons, technology. Second, and more important, in recent years, the transfer of the technology required for the building of a gigantic military industrial complex. Peaceful trade is the carrier vehicle by which equipment, technology, and skills are transferred from the West, mainly the United States, to the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm. But from American industries to Russian industries, both controlled and financed by New York bankers. That's this is what's really going on, and that's why they want the transfer of technology, because they want profit in their countries where they invest in. This is the motive behind it. It's not saving people or liberty. That means nothing to these people. It's just pure profit.
Mm-hmm. Free trade is eminently desirable in a free world of non-corrosive societies, but free trade with a statist system is not neutral. The question at issue is if we can show what trade is a carrier for self-destruction, then is free trade desirable? There are laws on the books to prevent such technical transfers. They are virtually ineffective. In practice, the policymakers and the bureaucrats in the executive branch act almost as if such laws did not exist. And if the reader thinks this a rash statement, he must explain the evidence presented in the chapters that follow.
And we're going to see the same thing just 20 years after Sutton writes these words with Bill Clinton, who gave this massive amount of technical transfer to the Chinese people. So now that the People's Republic of China, the Communist Party there, has intercontinental ballistic missile technology, which they didn't have before, and they have the technology to put probes on the moon, which they didn't have before. And why did Clinton do that? Well, it's because the Clintons are backed by the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, both Jewish Masonic bankers.
This evidence is well known in Washington. It is ignored because it is uncomfortable, or because it interferes with some other policy objectives. It is the conduct of economic relations with the Soviet Union, the ambitions and objectives of influential financial and business groups play a central role. Many prominent businessmen, Maurice Stans, Peter G. Peterson, Peter Flanagan, Averell Harriman, Robert McNamara, have exercised significant roles in developing our commercial policy towards the USSR. Publicized political labels may differ for election purposes, but they fade away once such men attain office in and our national policies remain fundamentally the same.
And just use a little reasoning. If our national policies remain fundamentally the same, then are we a country ruled by a two-party system?
No.
And is there any value in voting for either party?
No.
And there must be then one force that's really running the country, and it's not the political parties.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we need a Christian Party of America, because we currently have a Masonic United States of America. We
Mm-hmm.
don't have a Christian country, and we are ruled by Masons, a very, very small number of them who have enslaved us all and are controlling the entire system. And until they're arrested and until their power is broken politically and legally, we will never be free. No one will be free. Hundreds of millions, billions of people will die in this world, because this is a demonic sect. And as the popes have all said, it needs to be destroyed. There's no hope left for humanity unless this evil sect is destroyed. They are the ruling evil demons of the whole system of wickedness in this world.
Further, quasi-governmental institutions, such as the Committee for Economic Development, play a discrete but obviously important role in policy making. If the reports issued by such organizations ignore national security factors, then one can be sure that these factors are not reflected among prominent business appointees to political office. We therefore have a major problem regarding the interaction of big business and state policy, influence of business on state decisions, particularly if the objectives of the business financial group require the downgrading of technological transfers. Oh, I love this book. Are you still here?
Sutton really lays it all out, because he was so shocked to find it. Yeah, I'm still there.
Okay, making sure.
Yeah, Sutton really lays the whole thing out. Yeah, I know this program is having the most interference I've seen of any of our programs. You've faded out many times to me, but since you're doing the recording and I'm being quiet, you haven't lost anything. But this now I lost my track of thought. But Sutton ran upon that, discovered this because he worked for military industrial establishment during the Cold War. And when he found out about these technical transfers, he realized that things are not as they seem. Something else is going on. And this is what happens when you have a nation with parties that don't serve the people or the nation. They're serving bankers in New York. And they're not just serving them because the bankers are influential, but because the bankers are the ones that really control the country. It's not the people. The vote is just a theatrical act. November 4th or 3rd this year, you can vote for someone who will pursue the policies of Adolf Hitler, someone who will pursue the policies of Joseph Stalin. And I mean to say is one will make sure that companies definitely get their profits. The other will make sure that the entire population will be enslaved to work for the bankers. So either way, they get their money. There's two investment models. The one investment model they don't want is individual liberty, actual democracy, Christianity. Then they would lose control, and then their banks wouldn't make money. So obviously, one thing in any Christian country, when a Christian party comes to power, the first thing it has to do is nationalize the banks. It has to take the money away from the lodge, because as long as the money is under their control, they will have the power. And this will see how evil the system was and what they did. Because the Russian government might have killed 39 billion in their own country, but Marxists around the world are responsible for the death of more than 120 million. And what went on with Russia went on also with China. China's entire government. It's like right after the Second World War, we had all this military equipment left in China from the Second World War. And the decision was either to give it to the nationalists, those are the ones in favor of Christianity who are out of Taiwan, Chiang Kai-shek, or to give it to the communists who would have exterminated all the Christians. Well, who did Roosevelt give it to?
Communists.
He gave it all to the communists. And that seems shocking. Say, well, he was a Democrat. Well, no, Roosevelt was one of the biggest investors in GE who brought Hitler to power. So don't claim he was a Democrat. He wasn't a Democrat or a communist. He was a member of the Masonic Lodge. And they're the ones behind both. And Masonic Lodge ones, if they have to choose between profits, they'll choose Marxist dictatorship, which gives them more certainty of profit, and also gives them the other result they want, which is extermination of Christianity, atheism. And that's why they prefer that to National Socialism, because in National Socialism, you don't technically outlaw Christians or exterminate them directly.
Oh, yeah. The next section is the mystical foundations of policy. The mystical, by mystical we mean a policy not based on what? You dang British, you gotta use big words. Sorry, folks.
Go slowly, AJ. Imprescindible?
Okay, sorry, folks. I'm gonna have to spell it here. EMPIRICAL.
Empirical.
Empirical. Observations and rational deductions from these observations. Approach to research for foreign policy determination in the intimate interests of some elements of big business and specific policies, as well exemplified in a recent report by the Committee for Economic Development. A new trade policy towards communist countries. The CED is a prestigious organization with trustees from the highest levels of American industry and with research conducted by prominent academicians. Undoubtedly, yeah.
Academic.
Okay, academics. Undoubtedly, CED is a persuasive influence in current policy making. Peter G. Peterson, former Secretary of Commerce and one of the prime architects of the current Detente policy, is listed as CED trustee on leave for government service, and other trustees of CED will be prime beneficiaries of our new trade policy towards USSR.
Isn't that so convenient?
Yeah. That CED still around?
It's probably changed names now, because the only facades, the only little temporary groups to make the public think that the government is getting impartial advice from the American public.
Oh.
But really it's the actual system of control between the bankers and the government. That's how they really make their opinion known. People on the boards of groups like the CED will meet in Masonic lodges or the boardrooms of bankers in New York and be told exactly what to say and what policy to pursue. And the people elected with the money of the bankers in New York will know that without talking to the bankers in New York, they will be told what to do through groups like this, and they must accept it. So this is window dressing. So the people elected to the presidency, they can say, I'm just following the advice of experts, because they want to hide the system of control from the people. Because if you really knew what was going on, you would never vote Democrat, Republican again for the rest of your life. And that's why they don't teach you the truth of American history or world history in your American civics class.
Yeah. The paramount factor in the strategic aspects of trade with communist countries is technologically transfers through trade, specifically the use of our technology by the Soviets for military purposes, and the demonstrated inability of the Soviet Union as a typical statist country to push forward the technological horizon. Far from coming to grips with this fundamental problem, the CED reports suggest only that it is a very troublesome issue, as it invades the topic as follows. The fact that the transfer of technology will strengthen the economy of a potential enemy is not necessarily a sufficient reason to deny the transfer.
Yeah. Now you can understand why General Georgi's Patton's assassination, or death, we could say, was a political necessity, because
Mhm,
Patton, at the end of the Second World War, realized that Russia was the real enemy to liberty of the West, and he wanted to lead the armies into Russia and conquer Russia.
mhm,
And if he had been allowed to live, he would have won the presidency of the United States, and he would have liberated Eastern Europe.
mhm,
But that would have hit the balance sheet of the New York bankers, who are making much more profit in Russia than they were in Europe, because where there's less freedom, there's more profit because you have slavery. So
mhm.
he had to die. He had to be eliminated. And you needed someone like Eisenhower, who would found the CIA, incorporate the entire Nazi spy network, and uh, give the bankers even more control in the United States, and allow the theater of the Cold War to go forward. And
Yep.
uh, this is these are the dark, this is the real history, American history, and this is what really went on. And this is why the US never did anything to take down the Soviet Union, because it was a New York investment.
Yep. Then, without further ado about the very troublesome issue, the CED report recommends what it so urgently set out to prove. We recommend that the United States remove all restrictions on exports to communist countries, with the exception of military equipment and the kind of advanced technology that will be particularly useful in producing such equipment. Okay.
Maximize profits.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we just gotta change make the shipping label here. What? This is not equipment. This is household goods.
Yeah, we laugh at it, but when we think of the hundreds of millions that were killed, it's really sad, and it's gruesome.
Mm. This means little, for we have never had meaningful restrictions on trade with communist countries. That could be removed. The evidence for this statement will be presented further on in this book. It should be noted that the CED only wants to ban particularly useful military technology. Presumably military trucks are okay, but atomic warheads, taboo. Yet they got them anyways.
Yeah, they were that's true. They were giving them anyways. And you know the how Russia got the H bomb. Do you know the story behind that, AJ?
Nope.
The data, the information was stolen by a group of spies working for Russia. They were nearly all Jews, and they were in the atomic project there in Nevada, but they were residents of New York City.
Hmm. Wow.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And
Oh,
and we don't really know who was behind it, because they're the only traitors in U.S. history who were hung. They were hung so before they could really tell anyone who put them up to it. That was very convenient.
now why did the CED report hastily abandon the obvious research path? That is to investigate technological transfer to the USSR and their effect on the Soviet military industrial complex. The scientific method is known to CED's academic research staff, and it suggests that a very troublesome issue requires thorough exploration and detailed investigation. Of course, if the CED staff had explored and investigated the very troublesome issue, it would have found the same story that is outlined in this book, but then CED would not have been able to prove the conclusion it had set out to prove. Mhm.
And the conclusion to this is the CED is a front organization for others with heavily invested interests in a different outcome, the outcome they already had chosen or were involved in beforehand.
Our military assistance to the Soviets is not what the Committee for Economic Development wants to discuss, or even to consider as part of the evidence. CED is apparently determined to prove, come what may, that expanded trade with the USSR can only be beneficial. Only one member of the committee, Philip Sporn of New York, submitted a strongly dissenting opinion. He concluded, "This report has left me wondering why a group of hard-headed businessmen can so easily be beguiled by shallow philosophical shibboleths. It may leave others wondering too. Assume what you set out to prove. Sweep contrary evidence under the carpet. Put the dissents in the footnotes or in the back of the report. Stack the committee, stack the research staff, and no doubt complain if someone calls the Committee for Economic Development an organization of mystics. This mystical approach to making policy recommendations bears strange fruit. One of the CED trustees is Ellison L. Hazard, a director of Kennecott Copper Corporation. In July 1971, the Marxist Allende government of Chile seized the Kennecott mines in Chile, and the firm has now reported a related loss of $50.4 million. Nowhere in the CED report is there any sign of protest by Mr. Hazard. Nowhere in the CED report is there indication that our transfer of technology will encourage further Marxist takeovers and further Marxist expropriations, if not for Kennecott, then for some other U.S. company.
Yeah, well, shortly after making that comment, the CIA overthrew the Marxist government of Chile and installed a dictator, Pinochet, who killed thousands. So they rectified that in their own way.
Lenin once adverted the capitalists would supply the rope to hang themselves, and no truer words have ever been spoken. If the directors of Kennecott Copper and the trustees of CED want to hang themselves, that's fine. But the rest of us may well get hanged alongside these myopic mystics and their policy-making friends in Washington. Ellison L. Hazard is not one of the more prominent of these business mystics. Irwin J. Miller, Cummins Engines, Eugene R. Black, Chase Manhattan Banks are considerably more prominent and more vocal. That is the prime raison d'etre for this book.
Chase Manhattan Bank. There we have it again. The Morgan, the J.P. Morgan, the Rockefeller Bank. So,
Isn't there a celebrity fundraiser going on for Armenia out of that bank?
Yeah, the big so-called fundraiser for the Art Task Republic is an account with Chase Manhattan Bank. Mm-hmm. And Chase Manhattan Bank is Rockefeller, and Rockefeller is Standard Oil, and Standard Oil is British Petroleum, and British Petroleum is the big investor in Azerbaijan. So how is it that they're on both sides of this war?
Mm-hmm.
Gets you to think.
Yep. Okay. Time for that French word again.
D'entente.
The D'entente aggression cycle. The Soviet Union has mastered the use of the cycle of the D'entente, an aggression to first elude and then plunder the West, particularly the United States. Within this secular cycle of Soviet, sometimes used D'entente, the aggression simultaneously, for example, they will preach Detente in Washington to gain American technology, while simultaneously using American technology, provide arms for North Vietnam to kill Americans. Contradiction is fundamental to Russian mind. It is an important operational weapon for the communists, but the American mind has difficulty in understanding this. Washington policymakers therefore push aside as irrelevant those aspects of Soviet policy that are contradictory and do not fit their preconceptions. In early 1920s, when socialist ineptness brought famine to Russia, former President Hoover and the American Relief Administration organized the import into Russia of vast quantities of food and clothing. The Soviets were simultaneously exporting wheat to help German revolutionaries, a contradiction to American observers. This went largely unnoticed at the time, but it was a harbinger of ability of the Soviets to conduct hostilities against the West while holding out the hand of friendship.
What he says here about the Americans have a hard time understanding, we need to put a correction here. The Masonic lodges pretend not to understand. They understand, but their propaganda keeps people from thinking about it, because as soon as you start speaking about it, you're called conspiracy theorist, fringe thinker, extremist,
Mm-hmm.
un-American,
Yep.
making problems,
Yep.
opposed to job growth or
Yep.
business or trade or
Yep.
free trade
Yep.
or democracy
Yep.
or international relations or world peace. They'll hit you with something because they want you to keep looking at this over here and not who's really doing it, which is over here. And you can see this right now doing what's going on in the United States with the election. So many Catholics have been completely mind controlled by the propaganda that they only will repeat the Masonic talking points. They can't even begin to think that something is awry. I think of all the leading Catholic media sites, only Canon 12, Frank Walker, is questioning Barrett is being a faithful Catholic. He's the only one open and saying, you know, wake up. This woman isn't a faithful Catholic. And so we shouldn't be all on her bandwagon. He's the only one, all the others are saying, she's the perfect Catholic. If Trump appointed her, then she's the perfect Catholic. If she's the perfect Catholic, it doesn't matter even if she's in favor of contraception, as what was it?
Yesterday.
Someone recently said, we won't mention his name.
Yeah.
um,
She was asked this by, I'm not sure, one of the Democrat senators if some case brought up to the Supreme Court about contraception, and she said she would put her faith aside and rule correctly along, with contraception.
as we
And
said, we said she's a Freemason, and people
mhm,
wouldn't believe it. Now she just admitted it.
and my response to that person we won't name, we don't need a Judas on the Supreme Court, but we have almost all seats are Judases. This is why the Christian Party of America must win. So we no longer deny our faith when it comes to politics or the law, by denying the heart of all law, the Ten Commandments. We have no law.
That's exactly right. And why listen to any Catholic speaker that says this is not the case or tries to gloss it over? Because the truth is, we not only have, I think it's 9 Judas Iscariots on the Supreme Court, or 8. I think there's only one you would say it's not. The justice who is of African descent, what's his name?
Thomas.
Thomas, one of the best. He's Catholic. But the people who are pushing or who have soaked up and are regurgitating Masonic propaganda or Republican propaganda, which is because the Republican Party is a Masonic party, they are Judas Iscariots. They are not preaching the gospel. They're preaching the betrayal of Christ as superior to the gospel. They're saying that you're not faithful to Christ unless you vote Masonic.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the ones who will, if once the Catholic Party, the Christian Party of America gets going, they're the ones that can come out in the attack, because they are really Freemasons. And if you examine the backgrounds of all these people, if everything is very questionable. They aren't Catholics from birth, have always practiced their faith and always been faithful to Christ and have nothing other than the honor and glory of God before their eyes. They have doubtful pasts, and for them, they'll sooner repeat the Masonic propaganda to get those likes and clicks and donations from other similarly hoodwinked, brainwashed people or operatives, or even CIA or deep state agencies, than tell you the truth to save your soul and save your nation. And that is the worst kind of treachery. That is, these people are traitors, not just to Christ, but to their own nation. And you need to stop listening to them, because just like the mainstream media, if you listen to CNN all the time, you're going to lose your mind, because it's just one lie after another. And these people, well, they don't lie openly, but they'll tell you half truths. But they do lie about morality. They'll say it's more evil not to vote than it is to vote for a Masonic candidate. They actually say that, and they pronounce it loudly. And they claim they're pro-life or Catholic or conservative. They claim that. They have the gall to claim that.
Yep.
And I'm not just talking about laymen, even clergy. Even clergy betray Jesus Christ that way.
So let's go. Let's finish up this section. The life-saving assistance of the American Relief Administration did not inhibit the Soviets from espionage and subversion in the United States in the 1920s, or from arming Chinese revolutionaries, or from exporting revolution to Europe and the Far East. Then in the 1930s, American firms planned and constructed the largest units of 5-year plans. President Roosevelt made an agreement with Russia, only to find that the Soviets had broken their political promises within a month of signature. However, American assistance in technology and credits continued to flow. This assistance weathered Soviet involvement in the Spanish Civil War and massive Soviet espionage in the United States. In fact, altruistic Detente was so powerful a force within the Roosevelt administration that a secret military information agreement between Stalin and Roosevelt, known to only 4 persons in the United States, averred that democratic America and totalitarian Russia had a commonality of interests. During World War II, the United States gave the Soviets top priority in supplies. 1/3 of Lenin's leased shipment to Russia comprised industrial supplies for post-war reconstruction. Lend-Lease continued to flow after the war up to the mid-1946 under the 20-year credit term at 2.38% interest, a far better rate than returning GIs could obtain. The Soviets used their enlarged military industrial complex, which had been expanded with Lend-Lease assistance, to foment the invasion of South Korea and supply their allies throughout the disastrous Korean War. After a decade of further Soviet intervention abroad and repeated assertions of their peaceful intent, the later emphasized by the State Department and promoted by liberal academics, we had the fiasco of Vietnam. By now, the altruistic mystics in Washington were in full control. Instead of clamping down on technological exports to the Soviet Union, they expanded assistance and so guaranteed a 10-year war of attrition.
So if you have a relative that died in the Korean War, or died in the Vietnam War, or died in the Second World War in the European theater, don't hold revenge against the Germans, the Russians, or the Vietnamese, or the Chinese. You go to 140 Broadway in New York City and stand in front of the Brown Brothers Harmon Bank. They're the people who killed your sons. They're the people who are behind the whole thing. And that's where all the blood of 140 million people, less, I said 140 Broadway. And that's where the war monuments should be put, because they're the people at that address that killed these people.
Yeah.
Oh, and that bank manages $6.5 trillion in investments. So there's a lot there. If someone wants to sue them.
And I think our last section, persecution of Russian Jews, Russian Baptists, and Lithuanian Catholics.
Now, when you read this to me, I was saying, I'm kind of amazed by what you just said, because what are the 3 groups in New York City that Masonic bankers don't like? Jews, Catholics, and Protestants.
Yep.
So if you're going to invest in Russia, you kill the people you don't like there.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Economic assistance to the Soviet Union is usually justified on the grounds that it will mellow the Soviets and induce a regime to gradually relax totalitarianism. This has been the argument for 50 years, since there have never been any signs of fundamental change, and since this economic assistance is precisely the means by which the Soviet military establishment is maintained. It is well to emphasize both the continuation of repression by the Soviet authorities and the absence of mellowing. Eternal actions confirm that the Soviet government is acting exactly as we would expect a statist regime to act. Anatoly Marchenko, in his book My Testimonies, published in 1969, illustrates that the change in Soviet prison camps is only quantitative, but certainly not qualitative. The camps do not hold the tens of millions that were incarcerated under Stalin, but there are still tens, probably hundreds of thousands in Russian concentration camps. The repression takes several forms. Firstly, religious groups are brutally oppressed for no more than their wish to practice the natural right of worship. The Jews have recently been in the news, but the Baptists have long suffered persecution, as have the Catholics in Lithuania. The case of the Jewish scientist Vladimir Slepak has aroused considerable interest in Great Britain, but not in the United States, where the wire services are indifferent to details of Soviet persecution. Huh.
He means by the wire services, the news agencies, Reuters, UPI, API. All these were founded by Jews, but they all support the big capitalists and the big bankers. So, yeah. And have always been associated with the big banking families.
The case caused so much concern in Great Britain that a prayer book signed by the British Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition in the House of Commons, and 200 members of Parliament was sent to Slepak as a token of British esteem and sympathy. It is difficult to imagine in the present pro-Soviet euphoria that 200 members of the Congress would so express their esteem for an imprisoned Russian. The Soviet authorities refused to allow Slepak to accept the prayer book, and it was returned to Great Britain. Released after his most recent arrest, he was contacted on October 7, 1972 by a British Member of Parliament, Greville Jenner, also a Queen's Counsel. The following is an exact extract from Jenner's conversation with Slepak concerning his arrest and brutal treatment by the Soviets. Slepak. On the 19th September, I was arrested in the street and kept in the police station from 10 a.m. until 7 p.m. Then I was released and I went to the Central Telegraph, where there was a group of Jews who were on hunger strike in protest against the ransom tax. Then I went to my friend's place where I had a telephone conversation. After the conversation, I was arrested again in front of my house. For 3 days alone, I was kept in a cell in the police station, where I had to sleep on a bare floor. I was alone. Janner, any blankets Slepak? Without. Janner, anything to read? Slepak, no. Anything to eat? Janner asked. Slepak replied, something. Then I was removed to the prison of Machulsokak Yeshina, where before that Nashpitz and Shapriya, young Jewish activists, each now serving 12 months corrective labor, were kept. There for 20 hours, I was kept in a box 1 meter by half a meter, about 3 foot by less than 2 foot. What sort of box was that? A little room. Of course, in that 1 meter by half a meter, there was not room to lie down. No, there was no place to sit or to lean against the wall. The walls were covered with thorns. The box was very dirty. A friend of Slepak explained to me that these thorns were in fact spikes or nails protruding from the cement, which had the effect of preventing lice from mounting the wall, but which also prevented the occupant of the box from leaning against the sides. Jenner, did you have a bucket? Uh, uh, Jenner, Slepak, Janet, Slepak, I was, Slepak replied, I was twice allowed out for that. Then for 4 days, I was in a cell without any heating or glass in the window. It was very cold. There I had to sleep on bare boards. The temperature outside was about 0. January, near freezing point. Slept packed. Yes, I had no warm clothing and I was freezing. The prison authorities gave no permission for my family to pass me any warm things. By the end of the 8th day, I was moved to a cell where Manuvik, my friend, was kept. I was there for 8 days, and all the term of imprisonment, we have we have had hot food only every other day. The day the day when we were not given hot food, we were given about a pound of rye bread and water. Tanner, were you investigated? Were you interrogated? Slepak, in the police station only. They said that I must be in prison for 15 days. All 15 days we did not smoke. We had no books to read. We had newspapers 5 days before we were released. On the second day of my being in prison, I heard the chief of the prison telling the guard by my cell, this is an enemy, a real enemy. The chief of the prison said this to the guard near my cell. Text provided by courtesy of the Bay Area Council on Soviet Jewry, San Francisco.
And that isn't even an ounce of some of the horrible things that were done to prisoners. If you want to know how brutal the Soviet regime was against Catholics, for example, or Russians in general, read With God in Russia, autobiography of a Catholic priest who was imprisoned in Russia, and for many, I think more than 20 years, until he was finally released when they exchanged the prisoners for the U-2 spy plane. And the fact that bankers in New York could finance this level of brutality and not even get picked by it must mean that these families that run these banks, these Masonic families, must be absolutely demonic sadomasochists that actually take pleasure in torturing people, and they get their kicks of it because most people would have like a stomach punch reaction to be so disgusted at this they'd pull their investments out. But these people love money so much and power so much, they don't care how much Jews suffer, Christians suffer, Protestants suffer. They don't care. And that means it must actually delight them to hear these stories.
Mm-hmm. The treatment of Russian Christians is as bad, or perhaps even worse, than the treatment of Russian Jews. There are available in the United States translations of Russian underground books that portray almost unbelievable persecution of these Christians. The trial of Baptists in Odessa on February 2nd to the 7th, 1967 is described in a booklet, Russian Christians on Trial. The charge against the Baptists was practicing religion in a manner inconsistent with Soviet law on religious cults. Defendants would not accept state-appointed preachers, but wanted to form their own congregations. They were found guilty. 5 defendants, N.P. Shavinko, G.G. Boroshuko, Y.N. Krivoli, S.P. Slovova, and V.I. Alexieva, were sentenced to 3 years each in ordinary regime forced labor camps.
And we see this same mentality in the lockdown. Don't you dare sing. There was a church in California, for singing in their church, they were fined $10,000.
Mm,
And there was a church, I think in Georgia, or was it South Carolina? The police came in and arrested them all.
mm,
And you don't hear cases like this taking place in restaurants, theaters, or gyms. The governors, both Republican and Democrat, have used, even here in the United States, in Italy, used extreme violence. The worst kind has been used against Christians worshiping in the church. And since the scamdemic comes from Gates, and Gates is Brown Brothers Harriman, it's coming from the same boardrooms of the same bankers. They hate religion because they're Freemasons, and their lodge is dedicated to destroying religion. They want that done with their money.
Swedish sources estimate that an important portion of the 3 million prisoners held in Russian ordinary regime camps are Christians and Jews, persecuted only for their religious beliefs. Another volume, Before Death, by G.M. Shimov. The American version, which is abbreviated as G.M. Shimov, notes from the Red House, an eyewitness account of the communist torture of sane people in psychiatric institutions. Good Lord.
Just like MK Ultra, right?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Which was published by Semidat, a Russian colloquial term for the underground circulation of mimeographed or typewritten copies of works that cannot be formally published because of government censorship. Details the use of special psychiatric institutions in Kazan, Shivika, Leningrad, Chernikovsk, Minsk, Dnipropetrovsk to treat Christians as insane. The drug immunizone is used to break down personality. What the heck is that? I'm going to search.
They give people drugs so they don't recognize who they are anymore.
Yeah. And of course, folks, if you search that name of the drug, it does not come up. But what does come up is Amazon.
And you know, this technology on how to break down personality, if you, as our program is on the MK Ultra program, videos we posted show, it was developed by the Nazis and perfected by the CIA. So this is probably more technology transferred too.
It is obvious that the Soviets are no more part of a civilized world than was Ivan the Terrible. In 1969, President Nixon resurrected Gay's idea of a peaceful trade with the Soviet Union in January 1970. Came the jailing of dissidents Gabay and Zimiliev, followed by revocation of Soviet Union's citizenship. And the clergy were persecuted by the Soviet state. In May 1970, Emmerich was arrested, and Medvedev was arrested. In August 1970, Joseph was placed in a mental hospital. Soon after, the American newsman was expelled, and the general pattern of charge and countercharge continued through the end of the year.
So it almost seems like after their vicious persecution of Christians and Jews, Russia qualified for a new round of investments. And so here comes Nixon, who we already mentioned in a previous show is a Rockefeller, Brown Brothers Harriman candidate, because the Republican Party is completely controlled by Brown Brothers Harriman. So this shows that not only is the cruelty and the vicious barbarity not revolting to them, it's a condition for investment.
In 1971, we had a disgraceful case of the Lithuanian seaman Kudirka. The U.S. Coast Guard official stood by while Soviet sailors boarded a United States ship in U.S. territorial waters and removed a Soviet subject who had previously requested asylum. Probably no other single incident in recent years illustrates the moral deg- the moral de-
Degradation.
of those who make our foreign policy. Apparently, nothing had changed since 1945, when under President Roosevelt, the United States and Great Britain cooperated in the forceful and brutal return of unwilling Russians to Stalin's tyranny. According to the Wall Street Journal, November 24th, 1972, the United States and Russia in 1945 signed a special convention for forcibly repatriating to the USSR some 4 million anti-communist Soviet subjects who had fled to the West. This agreement, known as Operation Keelhaul, was a violation not only of the traditional American spirit of freedom, but also of the Geneva Convention.
That's horrible. I never heard about that.
Me either.
That's a horrible atrocity.
It gets worse. American military police forcefully herded thousands of displaced persons into the waiting arms of the Russians. Even worse, in June 1945 at Fort Dix, New Jersey, some 200 Russian prisoners were drugged, and according to the Wall Street Journal, U.S. authorities allowed them to be taken unconscious aboard a Russian ship in New Jersey. Elsewhere, many refugees drowned themselves, slashed their throats, and otherwise committed suicide rather than return to the brutal death they knew awaited them. In 1973, as this book goes to press, the Keyhole file is still classified. Such cases ranging from 1917 to the present day shock and horrify any decent person. Unfortunately, these incidents have no impact at all on the policymakers in Washington, where an effort is made to keep all files locked and sealed.
So remember this the next time someone says you should vote Democrat or Republican. This is what these are the people they want you to vote for.
Mm-hmm.
This is why we need a Christian party of America, because they're ruled by barbaric, demonic parties. They're demonic. This is absolutely demonic and sadistic. It's absolutely demonic and sadistic. 4 million people.
Yeah. You're not knowing how many died in the waters of New Jersey. So if you're from New Jersey, you near where Fort Dix is, you where that boat was docked. Just remember the millions who decided to kill themselves and then go back for sudden death.
1,000. So, but the 4 million Russian anti-communists were sent back to Russia. That's twice as big as the Armenian genocide. So now you can see it's the same forces that allowed the genocide of the Armenians to go forward, that handed 4 million Russians back over to Russia. And you think the West's going to come to the help of Armenia? The Masonic-controlled West? So if there's any Armenians listening to our program, don't trust in any Western government. Do everything you can to save your people, because the Western governments have already decided to betray your people. And if you don't defend your people, there's nothing to do. So if there's any Christian scientists out there that know anything about drone technology, if there's anyone in the world willing to sell the Armenians armaments or things to defend themselves, go right ahead. You have the absolute right of God. And I'm not going to say violate the laws, but I will say that some countries' laws are used to destroy Christians, and therefore Christians aren't obliged in their faith to observe them.
He closes out this chapter with some figures that we don't know about, because it talks about the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Korean and Vietnam Wars, and all the equipment. In 1962, the Russian attempted to move long-range missiles into Cuba, thus precipitating the Cuban missile crisis and bringing the United States and Soviet Union to the brink of hostilities. This strategic move shows that the Soviets had not abandoned their international ambitions. Yet the following year came the wheat deal, again touted as a device to mellow the Soviets. It cost the American taxpayers at least $75 million in subsidies. Did the wheat giveaway mellow the Soviets? In the following year, 1964, they vigorously expanded the logistical support for North Vietnam in its effort to take over the South and so stoke what was to become an 8-year nightmare. The Korean and Vietnam Wars are discussed in Chapter 2. But as we look around the world today, do we see anything meaningful evidence of detente by the Soviet Union? The Soviets currently have a ship of some 30,000 to 35,000 tons under construction at Nikolaev yards on the Black Sea. It is an aircraft carrier, a type of vessel the Soviets do not as yet possess, although they have 2 helicopter carriers. If the Soviets want détente, why build an aircraft carrier? As human events commented on October 28, 1972, the Soviets clearly want to be able to project themselves into political situations anywhere on the globe. The Soviet Union currently maintains a naval task force in the Indian Ocean. It is reportedly building a base at Socotra in the Red Sea. It supports insurgent groups in Portuguese, come on, bud, speak. Portuguese uh, Guinea, Angola, Mozambique, Zambia, Tanzania, and elsewhere. It attempts the political penetration of Mauritius, Somalia, Tanzania, Zambia, and Malagasy Republic. Arab terrorists are armed with modern Soviet weapons. A naval base is under construction at Cienfuegos, Cuba, to support Soviet naval operations in the Caribbean. Moreover, the North Vietnamese attack on the South in the spring of 1972 was made possible only by new heavy weapons imported from the Soviet Union, including Soviet T-54 tanks, T-56 tanks, the PT-76 amphibious tanks. Hanoi's total task force, all Soviet supplied, was estimated at 1,000. Even Henry Kissinger admitted on May 9, 1972, that these weapons were supplied in quantities and of type that, in many respects, were especially artillery and heavy tanks, tipped the balance in North Vietnamese direction. U.S. News and World Report, May 22, 1972. Nor is the Soviet Union shy about claiming the credit for shooting down 4,018 American aircraft in Vietnam. Thanks to Soviet assistance, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam is equipped with up-to-date means of air defense, such as electronically controlled anti-aircraft missiles, radar, and jets. San Jose Mercury, August 19, 1971.
Got to protect your little slave state. It just produces and produces for you. So you can see how just absolute completely the Masonic order is out to destroy all of humanity and manipulate us. And until the Masonic Lodge is destroyed, mankind won't be free. And that will only happen with the Christian party, and I would say a Catholic party, because we're the only church that has stood against the Freemasons, and that will triumph over them because we have Christ at our back. But I hope we've given you enough information in this program to make it absolutely clear never to vote Democrat, Republican again. You're wasting your vote. You're being defrauded, and you are voting for the people that have enslaved you, are enslaving you, will enslave you, and one to exterminate you from the face of the earth, and make a buck while they do it.
Yep. And I urge you to go to christianpartyforamerica.wordpress.com. That is, and the 4 is FOR. So christianpartyforamerica.wordpress.com. And to join up, just go to the join up page. It asks you for just a short little resume. And I want to thank the members who have joined and are considering to join. And please join up, and hopefully we'll get this thing rolling where we can have members in all 50 states and other and U.S. territories: Guam, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, wherever else we have territory.
Okay, so and the Italian Christian Catholic Party is giving you guys a run. We already have 84 members, so you Americans need to wake up and get on the track here before the Italians outrun you in this race. And this is what Christians should do in any country. So if you're a listener from any other country, start a Catholic party, a Christian party, and work to save your nation from the Masonic lodges, and work together. All Christians should be working together for this. But people won't realize how necessary it is until they really study the history of the 20th century and what's been going on. And that's why we've been doing these programs here at Ordo Militaris Radio TV.
Yep. So tomorrow we're going to still give you history, but we're going to give you some more Kansas history, where Doc Holliday and Wyatt meet, and how it was in Dodge City and all that other stuff.
Okay, that will be very interesting to hear. Thank you, AJ, for having me on here to host this program on how corporate America supported the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
And the appendixes in that book sound like they'd be very interested. So where can listeners get a copy of that book, and how much does it cost?
Let's see.
And the title again?
National Suicide: The Military Aid to the Soviet Union.
Anthony C. Sutton, and it's still in print?
Yep, it's on Amazon. I think still $14, or you can. It's also linked on our show page. Get the paperback version, or you can also click the link above it for the PDF version.
Okay.
And all homeschoolers need to get all of Sutton's books. And throw out all of your other history books and use Sutton. So, this is Ordo Militaris Radio TV signing off. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.